Wheels of Progress. I can't go fishing today, Freddie, said Homer, because I'm helping Uncle Ulysses down at the lunchroom. Seems as though the fish ought to be biting on a day like this. Do you think your Uncle Ulysses could use an extra helper today, Homer? Because it is imperative that I have to go fishing. I just thought if you weren't busy. Gosh, Freddie, Uncle Ulysses would like it. He always says the more help, the merrier. But Aunt Aggie is a too many cooks spoil the soup sort of person, and she says she's sick and tired of seeing more people behind the counter than in front of it. Okay, Homer, said Freddie with a sigh. I'll see you tomorrow. Bring me a couple of donuts if you can. When Homer entered the lunchroom, there was Uncle Ulysses, puttering with one of his labor-saving devices. Hello, Homer, he said. You're just in time to help me adjust the timing mechanism in the electric toaster. When you want the toast to come out light brown, it comes out nut brown, and vice versa. Homer and Uncle Ulysses tinkered with the toaster and then tried several pieces of toast. Then they tinkered with the mechanism some more. How is the donut machine working these days, Uncle Ulysses? Asked Homer. Just fine, said Uncle Ulysses. We're selling more donuts than ever with that new recipe. I suppose you've heard about the lady who gave us the old family recipe, the lady who lost her bracelet in the batter. She lives in Cinderburg now. She's Naomi Enders, a great-great-great-granddaughter of Ezekiel Enders, the first settler of Cinderburg. She inherited all of the Enders property when old Luke Enders died. She owns the mill and the patent medicine company now and is living in the big Enders homestead at the edge of town. She stops by for donuts almost every day. One of my best customers, she is. Yep, said Homer. The judge mentioned that she had come to live in Cinderburg. He said that she was a public, spirited person and would be an addition to the town. She appreciates good food, said Uncle Ulysses, tasting a piece of nut brown toast. And what's more, she has a receptive mind, receptive to the new devices and upcoming ideas. A car stopped out front, and Uncle Ulysses peered out and said, Here she comes now, Homer. Better start packing 24 donuts to take out. Good afternoon, said Miss Enders. Hello, Homer. I haven't seen you since the night my bracelet disappeared. Hello, Miss Enders, said Homer. How do you like living in Cinderburg? I think it's a marvelous town, simply marvelous, replied Miss Enders. I've been thinking of what I could do to show my appreciation for the way the people of Cinderburg have received me. Everyone has been so kind, simply marvelous. I've just been talking to the judge, and he's informed me that there is a growing housing shortage and that people are having difficulty finding places to live. I've decided that a nice way of showing my appreciation would be to build a few homes on the family property. They could be replicas of the Enders homestead, a sort of monument, and I could rent them reasonably to deserving families. Said Uncle Ulysses, stroking his chin. Good idea, Miss Enders, good idea. Homer agreed, and while he counted out 24 donuts, he thought of the fun there would be, walking rafters and joists in the new homes. Uncle Ulysses stopped stroking his chin and said, I'll tell you, Miss Enders, it wouldn't do any harm to have more modern homes than the homestead. Of course, said Miss Enders, modern plumbing. Uncle Ulysses went back to stroking his chin and saying, modern kitchen equipment, said Miss Enders, as though she knew what would bring instant approval from Uncle Ulysses. Said Uncle Ulysses, and stroking his chin from left to right. Finally, he cleared his throat and said, These are changing times, Miss Enders, and we're living in an age of ideas and production genius. Now, take the way they used to make donuts, for instance, each one cooked by hand and all the time and bother. Now we have this wonderful machine makes donuts just like that, said Uncle Ulysses, snapping his fingers, snap, snap, snap. It's marvelous, said Miss Enders. Simply marvelous, continued Uncle Ulysses. Now, take the matter of houses, the way they used to build houses. Saw up each bore, hammer and nails one at a time, every little shingle and doorknob fastened on by hand. But now, said Uncle Ulysses, with up and coming ideas and modern production genius, houses can be built just like this. Here a machine makes donuts, and he makes a broad sweep with his right arm. That's the principle, pronounced Uncle Ulysses, while Miss Enders and Homer gazed in wide-eyed wonder. That's the principle that Henry Ford applied to making autos. Yep, autos are mass-produced like donuts. Ships are built like donuts, airplanes, refrigerators, and now houses. Yes, sir. The modern house ought to be mass-produced, just like cars or ships or planes. Yes, sir. Mass-produced, just like that. There makes donuts. And here, Uncle Ulysses snapped his fingers, snap, 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 and said, houses just like that, snap. And he then stopped waving his arms and talking and appeared startled that he had talked so much with such wisdom. He started stroking his chin again while Miss Enders, quite visibly impressed, was murmuring, marvelous, simply marvelous. Homer counted the 24 donuts again. Of course, said Uncle Ulysses, it wouldn't be quite as fast or as easy as making donuts, but with assembly lines and sub-assembly lines and power presses and a touch of ingenious, that's your recipe. You can bake a house in 24 hours flat. Snap. Build, corrected Homer. Simply marvelous, said the receptive Miss Enders. Simply marvelous. Homer had heard Uncle Ulysses' pet theories before, and the sheriff and the boys over at the barber shop all had heard. Uncle Ulysses carried on about up-and-coming ideas. In fact, arguing about Uncle Ulysses' pet theories had broken up as many pinochle and checker games as arguing about the World Series and women's suffrage put together. That was all that ever happened, though, arguing. But that afternoon in the lunchroom was different. Miss Enders was receptive to Uncle Ulysses' up-and-comingness, and what's more, she had the money to be receptive and up-and-coming with. Almost before the week was up, Miss Enders and the judge, who was her lawyer, and Uncle Ulysses, who was having conferences. They were having conferences. They wrote letters to Detroit, where they have assembly lines and sub-assembly lines and huge presses that can stamp out the whole side of a house just as easily as stamping out the body of a car or a section of a ship. They hired up-and-coming designers and landscape architects, too. Almost before she knew it, Miss Enders had arrangements for 100 houses, a whole suburb, to be built at the estate around the Enders homestead. As Uncle Ulysses so wisely put it, it don't pay to go to all the trouble of mixing batter and getting the machine hot for 2 or 3 donuts. Might just as well make 100 while you're at it. The plans were finally finished and the arrangements all made. The workmen arrived at the Enders estate, and then things really began to happen. The trees were chopped down and hauled away, the land was leveled by huge tractors, and streets were laid out around the old homestead in a day or 2. Then power diggers arrived right on schedule and dug one foundation after another. Homer drove over to the suburb with Uncle Ulysses and Miss Enders to see how things were going. Uncle Ulysses watched the dirt fly and counted the machines as the machines dug foundations. 72, 73, 74. I tell you, my boy, he said to Homer, you are witnessing the beginning of a new era in city planning and housing. 80, 81. Why, tomorrow they'll start to build. By the end of the week, people will live here. Simply marvelous, exclaimed Miss Enders. Just think, last week there were only grass and trees and squirrels on this spot. Everything had happened right on schedule, just as Uncle Ulysses had predicted. Huge trucks and trailers drove down the streets, uploaded sub-assembled sides and floors and roofs of the houses, all complete to the last window, doorknob, light bulb, hot and cold water. It was just as matter of an hour or so for the workmen to fasten the sides and floors together and put on the roof. As the Centerburg newspaper said in an editorial, truly, as we are witnessing a modern miracle. Little did Ezekiel Enders know when he founded this town 150 years ago that such things as this would come to pass. The Centerburg Bugle is sponsoring a 150 year of Centerburg Progress Week to be celebrated when this new part of town is finished. Judge Shank and Miss Enders are heading the committee and handling the celebration. Anyone wishing to take part in the pageant, please get in touch with the committee or call the Bugle office. Toward the end of the week, a truckload of mass-produced furniture was moved into every house. Each front yard had its own climbing rosebush, 2 dwarf cedars, a maple tree, all planted and sodded around about. Each backyard had its mass-produced ash-can birdhouse complete with weather vane and revolving clothesline. In fact, modern production genius had thought of everything: sheets, towels, pillowcases, and a print of Whistler's mother for over every fireplace. The houses were complete and ready to be moved into. They were moved into, and as you can see, moving in was little more than that signing a paper and hanging your hat on the mass-produced hanger in the hall. Uncle Ulysses was very busy these days, attending to last-minute details. The judge and Miss Enders were working frantically on the pageant for 150 years of Cinderbug Progress Week. Uncle Ulysses attended to streetlights and fire plugs, and one afternoon he met Homer on the street and asked, "Have you seen Dulcie Dooner around lately? I have to make arrangements to have street signs put up in the new suburb. Have you heard, Homer?" he added proudly. "They're going to name one of the street Ulysses Terrace in honor of me." "Why, yes, Uncle Ulysses. I saw Dulcie coming out of the cigar store around the square." Uncle Ulysses and Homer hurried back to catch Dulcie Dooner, the town's street sign putter-upper. "Hi there, Dulcie," shouted Uncle Ulysses. "I'd like to discuss a matter of business with you. Street signs for our suburb." Dulcie turned around and said, "Hi, Ulysses. Hi, Homer. I've been hearing about this new part of town." "It's a great thing for Cinderbug," said Uncle Ulysses. We'll need about 70 street signs, Dulcie. The signs are all made, and they can be fastened to the corner lamppost. We'll pay $1 a sign to have them put up." "Well," said Dulcie, "that's only $70, and I'm not so sure that the Street Sign Putter-Uppers Union would agree to that. But, Dulcie, there are almost 30 other signs to put up. That makes $100. The union surely wouldn't object to that." "Yes," said Dulcie, "I know, but I can't fasten the signs onto the corner street lamps because the Street Sign Putter-Uppers Union rules say that any street sign put up by a brother of his here union must be fastened to a post erected by a brother of this here union set in a post hole dug by a brother of this here union. The complete union rate is $10 a street sign for the whole post and sign." "But we don't need another post on each corner. The lamp post will do just well," said Ulysses, growing frantic. "Couldn't you arbitrate or something?" suggested Homer. "Yes," agreed Uncle Ulysses. "I'll write to the president of your union and ask him." "Well, Ulysses," said Dulcie proudly, "I'm the president of the Street Sign Putter-Uppers Union. I'm the secretary of treasurer, too. You see, Ulysses, I make all the union rules, pay all the dues, and collect them, too. So what I say goes. But certainly you must have coming ideas like the rest of the citizens of Cinderburg. There must be some compromise. Say $5 a sign." "Nope," said Dooley firmly. "It's $10 or nothing. Street sign putter-upper is a seasonal occupation, and I can't run the union on $5 a sign." Well, sighed Uncle Ulysses, "I guess we'll have to make other arrangements." "If you make other arrangements, the union will have to picket your new part of town," said Dulcie. Uncle Ulysses began to get mad. Homer hadn't seen him so upset since the night the donut machine wouldn't stop making donuts. He shouted something about Dulcie being a wrench in the wheels of progress, but Dulcie just repeated, $10 apiece or strike. Homer had to rush off before the argument was finished, because tonight, Friday, was the dress rehearsal of the pageant. Homer and Freddie and a couple of their friends were taking the part of Indians. They were going to be all powdered all over with cocoa, striped with mercurochrome, and draped with towels around their middles. Homer had to get to rehearsal right on the dot because he started the pageant by rubbing 2 sticks together to make a fire. Most of the pageant was historical, all about Ezekiel Enders and founding of Cinderburg. The organist of the African Baptist Church wrote the words and music for a long choral work, which the choir was going to sing all the while the pageant was being acted. The rehearsal went very well. The choir was in good voice, and the citizens taking part of Ezekiel Enders and the early settlers performed just right. So did Homer and Freddie and the boys, except for their scalping scene, which had to be modified somewhat. The grand 150-year Cinderberg Progress Week was drawing near. Meanwhile, every one of the 100 houses had been rented to a deserving family. Homer hadn't seen Uncle Ulysses in the past 2 days, but he knew he must be having troubles. For one thing, the street signs still hadn't been put up. As all of the streets looked alike, this caused some slight confusion to the deserving tenants. The fact that all of the 100 houses looked as alike as 100 donuts added to this slight confusion. However, the deserving tenants soon found that by counting houses from the Enders homestead, they could find their way home without much trouble. Freddie's aunt was one of the deserving tenants, and when Freddie and the Homer called on her, they had to count 3 houses down from the Enders homestead. 6 houses to the left, and the next house to the right was Freddie's aunt's. "It's sort of a game," Freddie said to Homer. Miss Enders was proud as punch of her suburb. She decided to call the Enders Heights, even though it was as flat as a board. "It's marvelous," she said, "simply marvelous." The only thing she wasn't happy about was that her house, the homestead, seemed to be out of place, sitting, as it did, in the middle of the Enders Heights. Uncle Ulysses and the judge agreed that the homestead did stand out like a sore thumb. They decided that the best thing to do was move it away and build another house there. It would have to be done quickly so as to be complete by the time the pageant started. That night, Uncle Ulysses, late that day, ironed out his difficulty with Dulcie Doomer. Dulcie, for $10 a sign and a slight increase for overtime and having to miss the pageant, agreed to have all the street signs up by the time the pageant ended that night. By 8 o'clock, the town square was crowded. Everyone was there to celebrate the 150 years of Cinderberg Progress Week. Promptly, at 8:15, Homer, as an Indian, started rubbing his sticks together to make a fire. After the fire was lighted, Homer, Freddie, and the other Indians left the stage. The judge was commentator, and while the pageant was being acted out in pantomime, he read from the history of Enders County. The African Baptist choir chanted in the background. Ezekiel Enders, boomed the judge. Set foot on American soil, owned by 2 shillings, an extra shirt, and a formula for making cough syrup, an elixir of life compound that had been handed down in the Enders family for years. Soon after arriving, he took himself a wife and was soon the father of a child. The judge looked up from the text and said, "This child was destined to be the grandfather of our own dear, public-spirited citizen, Miss Naomi Enders." A loud applause rang out. The judge continued, "Hearing of the fertile lands to the west, Ezekiel Enders packed his beloved wife and son and his formula into the covered wagon, and with a few brave followers started toward the west, the land of plenty. Trouble seemed to follow Ezekiel and his brave little band. Their food ran out, game was scarce, and one day they found themselves in the wilderness with no food to sustain life. It was on that day, 150 years ago, on this very spot, that Ezekiel found 42 pounds of edible fungus growing in the forest. Here the African Baptist choir sang out in rich harmony. 42 pounds of edible fungus in the wilderness a-growin'. Save the settlers from starvin', help the founding of this nation. 42 pounds of edible fungus in the wilderness a-growin'. Ezekiel took it to be a sign, so he and his followers founded a town on this spot. Ezekiel purchased 2,000 acres of land from the Indians with a jug of cough syrup. They named the town Edible Fungus, and they tilled the land and prospered. Peace and prosperity rested like a benediction on the brave company until the Indians, having been addicted to Ezekiel's cough syrup and elixir of life compound, rose in arms against them. Ezekiel buried his supply of the compound in his cabin floor and guarded his formula and his loved ones. In the time that the Indians' uprising was quelled, and once more peace and prosperity came to edible fungus. The choir sang, "Peace again in edible fungus, prosperity now rests among us." We now skip 75 years to the time Ezekiel's son founded the Enders Patent Medicine Company and the mill. The town had grown prospered, and its name was changed from edible fungus to Cinderberg. Loud cheering. The rest of the pageant was very symbolic. Uncle Telly's wife, the former Miss Terwilliger, was dressed as the spirit of the water power. Miss Enders was the spirit of cough syrup and vitamin B compound. The ladies of the Grange were the spirits of agriculture. The judge then told the story of the building of Enders Height, while Aunt Augie, Uncle Ulysses' wife, dressed as the spirit of progress and the up-and-comingness, hovered on the platform. The celebration ended with a torchlight procession to Enders Heights. But lo, once again, the peace and comfort of edible fungus, alas, Cinderberg, i.e. Enders Height, was threatened. The street signs were not up. The Enders homestead had been moved. Another house, like all the others, stood in its place. 101 houses all alike, down to the last doorknob, each with its climbing rose bush, 2 dwarf cedars, a maple tree sodded around about, just as alike as the 101 donuts, and nothing to count from to find out which was which and whose was whose. There was a mad scramble, and much was shouting, with the deserving tenants trying frantically to find out which house was which. The shouting broke into a chant of, "We want Dulcie, we want Dulcie, we want Dulcie Dooner." Uncle Ulysses could do nothing. He had given his plans and diagrams to Dulcie to the signs could be put up correctly. Miss Enders had another set of plans and diagrams in one of her handbags or somewhere, but it couldn't be located at the moment. "We want Dulcie Doomer," the crowd roared. The judge began to worry about the reputation of the town. There had never been a lynching in Enders County, he said. It was Homer and Freddie who finally found Dulcie quietly sleeping on a street corner that was just like all the other streets corners except for the post hole Dulcie started to dig. The crowd gathered around. They shook and prodded Dulcie, shouting, "Where are the plans? Where are the diagrams? Where is Ulysses Terrace? Where is Ezekiel Road?" It was soon apparent that Dulcie was more than just asleep. He opened one eye and answered all the questions the same, and shrugged of the corners, "I don't know," and a hiccup. The plans and diagrams couldn't be found. It was Homer and Freddie, still dressed as Indians, of course, who found the little wooden keg near the corner. They smelled it. They tasted it. Freddie shouted, "I know, it's cough syrup, an elixir compound," added Homer. Dulcie dug it up. There is where Dulcie buried it, and this is where the homestead stood. That was it, and it didn't take the worthy tenants long to count their way home. Old Doc Pelly diagnosed Dulcie's trouble as an overdose of cough syrup and elixir of life compound, aged over 100 years in a wooden keg. Dulcie was up and about the business of installing street signs late the next day. 150 years of Cinderberg Progress Week came to a close with peace and prosperity. Time and progress moved ahead. The Ezekiel Enders homestead moved back to take the place of the 101st houses too. You see, the worthy tenants, though up and coming, aren't taking any chances. Meanwhile, the whole nation is singing. 42 pounds of edible fungus in the wilderness a-growin'. Save the settlers from starvation. Help the founding of the nation. 42 pounds of edible fungus in the wilderness a-growin'. The end.